Okay, let's continue with our discussion. Let's go to inventories. Ngayon, inventories is governed by International Accounting Standard or PAS number 2, which it prescribes for the accounting treatment of inventories. Ngayon, anong main issue pagdating sa inventories? Ito lang. Accounting for inventories is the amount of cost to be recognized as an asset. Yan yung main issue. Ano yung amount of cost na i-recognize mo as part of the value of the inventory, considering the inventory is an asset. Determination of the cost and subsequent recognition of expense. It includes yung write down ng inventory to its net realizable value. Ngayon, Intermediate Accounting Standard number 2 applies to all inventories except for the following. Yung under sa financial instruments, yung IAS 32 and IFRS 9 natin, and yung biological assets related to agricultural activities and agricultural produce at the point of harvest, IAS 41. Ito yung next topic after ng IAS 2. So yan yun. Applies to all inventories, tandaan nyo yan except for the following two. Ngayon, IAS 2 or PAS 2 defines inventory as an asset. Of course, because may tatlong categories yan. Di ba? Ito familiar tayo sa finished goods, sa work in process, and sa raw materials. Finished goods, ito yung mga held for sale in the normal course of the business. Itong work in process, nasa production pa lang. Itong raw materials, ito yung mga supplies na ginagamit sa production process. Di ba? Familiar na tayo sa mga terms na yan. Uy, napindot yung Ngayon, paano natin nire-recognize ang inventory? Una, they meet the definition of inventory. Ito naman. And legal title is obtained by the buyer from the seller. Now, kailan na-obtain yung legal title? General rule, possession is transferred. Pero as we know, general rule always provides an exception. Anong exception yun? Exception yun. Itong following. Yeah? Kasi ang general rule, basta transfer na yung possession ng inventory from seller to buyer, the buyer now owns the inventory. Siya na may legal title eh. However, general rule yun, ito yung exception. Una, control over economic benefits is transferred, pero yung physical possession, hindi pa natatransfer. Yung economic benefits lang. Anong mga kasample niyan? Goods in transit, that is shipped under FOB shipping point, di ba? Pagka shipping point yung FOB shipping point yung transit ng goods, diba? Kahit na hindi pa natatransfer possession kay buyer, the moment that it was left by the seller doon kay courier, si buyer na yung may possession nun. Di ba? Pag nagkakaroon tayo ng adjusting inventories, naalala niyo pa sa auditing probs nyo, tinitingnan talaga natin if FOB shipping point yan or FOB destination. Kasi pag FOB destination, yung legal possession or legal title sa goods, natatransfer lang kay buyer kapag na-receive na ni buyer yung inventory. Pero sa FOB shipping point, kahit iwan pa lang yan ni seller kay courier yung yung inventory, automatic HTPM si buyer na yung may ari nun. Next is consignor in a consignment arrangement. Remember, consignment lang yan, parang inassign mo lang yung isang tao, yung isang entity to sell your products. However, yun lang to sell your products. Yun lang yung karapatan niya. The legal title is still yours as the consignor. And next is inventories that are bought under bill and hold sale. Ano tong bill and hold sale? Basically, para siyang nangutang ka tapos ginawa mong collateral yung inventory mo. Ganyan lang si bill and hold sale. Nangutang ka, nag-loan ka, tapos yung inventory naging collateral. Ganun lang yung nature ni bill and hold sale. Another exception for the legal title transferred to possession is yung physical possession transferred but not control over economic benefit. Ito naman yung point of view ni consignee in a consignment arrangement. Kasi nga, si consignee, yes siya yung assigned na magbenta ng inventory. However, kahit nasa kanya yung possession, yung economic benefits nun kay consignor pa rin napupunta. Nagkakaroon ng commission si consignee. Now, this is how we account for inventory. If you can still remember, di ba, si perpetual and si periodic. Si perpetual, every time na nagkakaroon ng purchase and silang inventory, magre-record ka. Kay periodic, only after physical count. Di ba? Physical count. So, kaya perpetual, nagme-maintain tayo ng stock cards, kay periodic, hindi. Ngayon, yung performance of the physical count, internal control lang yan para kay perpetual. Kasi nga, may record na siya ng inventories niya, di ba? May stock card siya eh. Every purchase and sale, ni-record niya eh. So may record din siya. So yung physical count, it is a form of internal control na lang. However, pagdating kay periodic, itong physical count na to determines quantity of inventory on hand. Yeah? So ito yung kanilang tawag ito, journal entries. Ito yung format ng journal entries nila. Yeah? Ito, may inventory, wala ito. So tawag ito. So don't forget, perpetual, every galawan ng inventory, recorded yan. Kay periodic, wala sa pake. Ang pake niya lang yung determination on a physical count at the end of the period. So, di ba? Nagpa-flashback na. Ito, measurement of inventory. Now, how do we measure inventory? LCNRV. LCNRV. Always yan, di ba? LCNRV kay inventory. Lower of cost and net realizable value. However, gaya ulit ng sinabi natin kanina, general rule lang yan. May exception tayo. Ito ang exception. Producers of agricultural and forest products, agricultural produce after harvest, and minerals and mineral products to the extent that they are measured at net realizable value in accordance with practice in those industries. Kasi makita nyo dito, if you can still remember discussion sa intermediate accounting, ito yung mga industries na kung saan walang fixed standards. Walang fixed standards. Hindi madaling gawan ng standards. Kasi hindi siya uniform, kasi masyado siyang complex, di ba? Lalo dito sa mineral and mineral products, di ba? If you can still remember, ang sabi dito, hinahayaan lang or best judgment ng management yung pina-follow, di ba? Kasi mahirap gawan ng standards yan. Kaya sabi dito, as an exception to the LCNRV rule, net realizable value in accordance with well-established practices in those industries. And another exception is commodity brokers who measure their inventories at fair value less cost to sell. So yan general rule, LCNRV, exception itong dalawa. And yung cost ng inventories, tatlo yung contributors dyan. Si cost of purchase, cost of conversion, and other costs. Si cost of purchase yung acquisition, yung mga nagastos mo when you acquired inventory, gaya ng purchase price, import duties, and other taxes. Pero take note, yung mga not recoverable. Pag recoverable yan, hindi siya kasali. Pero pag not recoverable, kasali. Kasi kapag recoverable yan, ibig sabihin nabawi mo yan, so hindi mo yung nagastos at the first place, di ba? Pero pag not recoverable, ibig sabihin, nagastos mo talaga yan at the first place. VAT is recoverable, pero depende sa point. Depende. Kapag VAT taxpayer ka, not included in cost. Kasi, if you remember sa VAT, di ba may tinatawag tayong input and output VAT, di ba? Input and output VAT. So, nare-recover mo yun pag VAT taxpayer ka. Pero pag not VAT taxpayer ka, meaning OPT ka, di ba? OPT ka, included mo yan sa cost mo. Kasi hindi mo yan pwedeng ma-recover. Transportation cost, as a rule, the entity who owns the goods being shipped should pay for the shipping cost, FOB shipping point, and FOB destination. Handling costs pertaining to the acquisition of goods, yun din. Trade discounts, rebates, and other similar items are deducted in determining the cost of the purchase. So, ito yung mga cost of purchase. Ngayon, sa cost of conversion, yung direct labor lang yun yung factory overhead, which includes both the variable and fixed. So, and other costs, those costs that are incurred in bringing the inventories to their present location and condition. Sample yan yung cost of designing the products for specific customer needs. So, ito yung mga special order, di ba? Mga special job order. Ngayon, may mga cost tayo na hindi sinasama sa value ng inventory. Ito na yun sila. Excluded cost from inventory valuation because you will recognize this as expenses. Yung mga abnormal amounts of wasted materials, labor, or normal construction. Diba? If you can still remember your cost accounting, yung mga normal waste, sinasama natin. Pero yung mga abnormal, ine-exclude natin. Di ba? Storage cost. General rule, expense yan. However, if the storage is necessary to the production, gaya ng sa wine, di ba? Sa wine, habang mas matagal siya na-store, mas sumasarap, mas nagmamahal. Cheese, di ba? Ini-store din yan. Para tawag ito yung, term ginamit nila para mas sumarap daw yung cheese, di ba? Alam mo to, fermentation. Hindi, fermentation. Basta, yung ini-store nila, di ba? Pag necessary sa production, sama mo sa cost. Administrative overheads that are not necessary in bringing the inventory to special location and condition, tanggalin yan, and yung selling cost. Kasi nga, as you can see here, itong mga cost na to, hindi naman sila kailangan to produce the inventory at the first place or to acquire the inventory at the first place or to have the inventory at the first place. So, hindi sila dapat isasama sa cost ng inventory kasi wala naman silang labot in relation to the inventory. Ngayon, if the inventory is purchased on deferred settlements, meaning credit yan, either, nag-payable ka or nag-receivable, diba? Kasi, but in this case, purchase yan siya. So, nag-payable ka, credit terms mo na, deferred payment, it contains a financing element, and difference between the purchase price for normal credit terms and the amount paid is recognized as interest expense over the period of the financing agreement. So, pag may purchase price, then yung yung normal credit terms pati yung sa amount paid mo. Nagbayad ka ng yung purchase price is 10,000 pesos pero yung amount paid mo is about 11,000 pesos. So yung 1,000 pesos dyan is recognized as interest expense na i-laid out mo over the period of the financing agreement. Kasi usually, di ba, pag bibili ka on credit terms as compared sa kung bibili ka cash agad, di ba, may difference talaga yan. Yung kay Lenin, grabe ang taas ng mga, yung home credit nila. Chicken mo yan, mga 5K, 10K yan. Habang tumatagal, mas tumataas yung interest na kinakain ng credit terms nila, ng home credit nila, di ba? 5K, 10K. So, mas maganda, bumili ka na lang ng cash or i-credit card mo na lang. Kasi pag credit card mo yan, hindi magpapataw ng interest si Lenin. Kasi grabe yung home credit nila. Suki pa naman ako dun. So, inventories of service providers. Ngayon, ito pinag-uusapan dito is yung manufacturing, di ba? How about kapag hindi ka manufacturing but rather you provide service o extra service? Measure that cost of their production. Ito, don't worry, the standard provides for that naman. Ito, measure that cost of their production includes labor, other personnel directly used in providing services, including yung supervisory and other attributable overheads, and should not include profit margins or non-attributable overhead. So basically, sinabi lang dito, kung ano yung may labot sa pagbigay ng service, sa pag-provide ng service, yun ang isama mo. Pag wala namang labot yan, yung mga non-attributable, yung profit margins, diba kasi minsan, cost, tapos papatungan mo yan ng profit margin mo. Huwag mo isama yung profit margin kasi wala namang labot yan pagdating ng when it comes to providing the service. So, huwag mo isama. Now, the concept of net realizable value. Estimated selling price, tandaan nyo, estimated selling price in the ordinary course of business less the estimated cost of completion and the estimated cost necessary to make the sale. Yan yung NRV natin. Don't forget this formula of NRV kasi hindi lang yan sa FAR, pati sa AFAR meron yan. Pati sa MAS meron yan. So mga computations, kung ano yung NRV, kung anong net realizable value. So estimated selling price minus estimated cost of completion minus estimated cost necessary to make or estimated cost to sell. Yun. Estimated selling price minus estimated cost of completion minus estimated cost to sell. Yan yung formula ng net realizable value. Inventories are usually written down to net realizable value item by item. In some circumstances, mas appropriate na i-group na lang sila. Ay, napindot na naman. Kadikit kasi yung and pati yung right button. Yan ito. Ngayon, may cost formulas tayo. If you can still remember, specific identification, di ba? Lalo na sa mga, ito appropriate sa mga yung sa mga low turnout o mababang turnover, high value inventories, di ba? Ilagay ng mga kotse, di ba? Low turnover yan sila, pero high value, so madali silang ma-supervise, madali silang ma-supervise when it comes to measuring their inventory. Kasi alam mo, pinpoint mo eh. Pagdating sa 5-point weighted average, yan ginagamit mo na yan sila for voluminous transactions sa mga voluminous products, di ba? Ngayon, other 5 po, meron tayong periodic and perpetual, weighted average, moving average, and weighted average. However, yung LIFO sa IFRS, tanggal na yan. Pero sa US GAAP, ginagamit pa to siya. Pero sa atin, sa mga IFRS PIPs, ghosted na yan si LIFO. Ito, if you can still remember, don't forget na may mga may mga formulas yan, di ba, yung mag-solve. So, inventory estimation, IAS 2 permits the use of estimating inventories provided that they reasonably approximate cost. Kasi minsan, may mga scenario talaga na kung saan kailangan mong i-estimate yung inventory mo. Anong example niyan, sir? Example, nasunugan ka. Factory mo nasira. Or nasunog, I mean. So, yung mga inventories mo nawala na. Tapos yung ibang records mo in supervising that inventory na nasama sa sunog. So, paano yan? Paano ka magkiklaim ng insurance mo kapag hindi mo alam magkano yung nawala sa'yo? Yan, mag-estimate ka. But it should be reasonably approximated. And dalawang methods tayo meron dyan. Gross profit and retail method. And if yung maalala nyo, di ba, madali lang si gross profit gawin. Ito lang siya, assume relative, hanapin mo lang yung GPR, gross profit rate, in order to determine the cost ratio. And under GPR, dalawa yan. Based on sale and based on cost, ito yung formulas. Then the cost ratio will be used in estimating the cost of inventory. Mag-work back ka gamit yung cost ratio. The cost ratio is computed as follows. Ito yun. Ito, and take note of this. Pagdating sa retail method, ito na yung medyo lengthy as compared kay gross profit method. Kasi si retail method commonly used, as the name implies, sa retail industry. Where measuring inventories of large numbers of rapidly changing items with similar margins for which it is very impracticable to use other costing methods kasi nga voluminous transactions to. And take note, net markups and markdowns are considered in this method. So read that, and net markups are added. And pagdating sa inventories kasi for sa board exam, dalawa yung nalalabas. Either ito, specifically itong dalawa, either sa kanila, or itong gross profit, yung gross profit nilalabas. Kasi ang gross profit napakadali. Retail method yan, yung kailangan yung kabisaduhin. And ito yung formula when applying retail method for average cost method and for FIFO cost method. Ang difference lang ni average cost pati ni FIFO, si FIFO, hindi niya sinasama si beginning inventory. Si average cost, sinasama niya lahat. Yan lang yung inventories natin. So, gaya na sabi ko, when it comes to inventory sa board exam, itong dalawa, ito yan, ang ita-target. Or itong si retail method. Kasi sila yung may yung magandang gawa ng question when it comes to inventories, particularly sa problems. So, let's go to the next topic. Ito, agriculture. So, agriculture. So, agriculture is ruled is governed by Intermediate Accounting or Philippine Accounting Standard, International Accounting Standard or Philippine Accounting Standard number 41. So, anong main objective natin when it comes to accounting for agriculture? Simple lang. Establish accounting standards for agricultural activity. Now, how do we define agricultural activity? Sabi dito, according to IAS 41, agricultural activity is defined as the management by an entity of the biological transformation and harvest of biological assets for sale or for conversion into agricultural produce or into additional biological asset. Yan yung definition ng agricultural activity. So, tatlo yan . Dapat it can be managed by the entity. Dapat it is capable of biological transaction, a transaction transformation, and that it is harvested for biological asset for sale or for conversion. Tatlo ang characteristics ng isang agricultural activity. Now, the common features, you can still remember, tatlo yan, di ba? Capability to change, management of change, and measurement of change. IAS 41 shall be applied to account for the following when they relate to agricultural activity. So, ito to lang yung mga pwedeng ma-applyan ng IAS 41. Biological assets, except for better plants. Bakit? Malalaman natin later or maalala natin later. Agricultural produce, ito tandaan nyo, at the point of harvest. Other than that, like after harvest, ignore yan. Di na yan under IAS 41. Agricultural produce lang at the point of harvest and yung mga government grants na applicable dito. Ito yung sasabi natin, IAS 41, it applies to the following and it does not apply to these two, to this Like land related to agricultural activities because it is under IS 16 or which is the PPE and IS 40 which is investment property, di ba? So pag ganyan, land related to agricultural activity, hindi yan sa under IS 41. Bearer plans, sabi dito, bearer plans. Bearer plans. Oh, bakit kaya? Because bearer plans related to agricultural activities are considered to be under IS 16. IS 16. However, IS 41 applies to the produce. O yung bearer plants itself, IS 16 siya. Pero yung na-produce ng bearer plant, IS 41 siya. Dito yan siya, at the point of harvest. Yeah? Ngayon, paano natin malalaman? Paano natin malalaman or ano yung characteristics na masasabi nating bearer plant to? Kasi di ba? Maraming klase ng plant pero anong sabi ni standard para malaman natin? Ano yung characteristics ng i-consider mo to know if it is a bearer plant or not? Provided naman, ito, when it is used in the production or supply of agricultural produce, bearer plant yan. Expected to bear produce for more than one period. Ibig sabihin long term, bearer plant yan. IS 16 yan eh. Remote likelihood of being sold as agricultural produce except for incidental scrap sales. So as you can see, saktong-sakto. IS 16 yan eh. Hindi kasi pang madalian. Kasi ang agricultural produce, as we know, mga short term yan sila, di ba? Short term yan. Ito, tingnan nyo, kita nyo dito, pang long term yan sila. Hindi tulad ng relationship mo. Short term lang. Government grants related to bearer plants, IS 20, di yan kasali. And intangible assets related to agricultural activities, that is IS 38, intangible assets yan, intangible property. Ngayon, biological asset, anong diba? Kasi as we have said, agriculture IS 41 applies to biological assets and yung agricultural produce. Yeah? So ano ang isang biological asset? Sabi dito, it is a living animal or plant. So kung yung mga baka, kambing, di ba? O yung mga tag dito? Ano tawag doon? Manok. Okay, so nakalimutan ko manok. And agricultural produce, ito na may mga harvested produce of the entity's biological asset. Entity's biological asset. So yan yun. So ito yun. Ito yung mga distinguishment. If you can still remember yung book ni Zeus, di ba? Nakalagay ito. Itong, kahit anong edition nata yun. Pagdating nyo sa IS 41, ito yung makikita nyo talaga to. Di ba? Yung sineparate talaga yung or dinistinguish talaga. Ito sa biological assets. Ito naman yung agricultural produce. Ito naman yung products that are the result of the processing after harvest. Di ba? Yan sila. So ito, hindi na sila kasali ng ano. Hindi na sila kasali under IS 41. Ito lang. Ngayon, paano natin sila na-recognize? Paano natin mini-measure ang biological assets or ang biological produce? As you can see, it shall be recognized kapag itong mga requisites na follow. Control of the asset as a result of passive event, probable future economic benefit will flow to the entity, and fair value or cost can be measured reliably. As you can see, familiar to, di ba? Because biological assets or agricultural produce, considered naman yan as asset. So pag nasatisfy nila itong meaning ng asset, yeah, it will be considered as biological assets or agricultural produce. Kasi asset to, di ba? Familiar yung, ito, di ba? Itong tatlo. Kasi, yan yung mga kailangan mong ma-check para ma-consider mo sa asset yan. Ngayon, paano natin mini-measure yung biological asset? Initial recognition ito at the end of each reporting period is at fair value less cost to sell. Yan yung recognition ng biological assets. However, kapag yung fair value less cost to sell is not available, then ang gagamitin mo is cost less any accumulated depreciation and any accumulated impairment loss. Bakit? Presumption kasi, yung fair value can be measured reliably for a biological asset. However, it is on such presumption is rebutted or is disputable only pag initial recognition. Later on, pag subsequent recognition, then fair value less cost to sell yan. Ngayon, paano mini-measure yung agricultural produce? Paano sila na-recognize? Paano sila mini-measure? Ito sila. Fair value less cost to sell at the point of harvest. At the point of harvest. Okay? Kasi pag hindi yan at the point of harvest, di inventory na yan, di ba? Inventory na yan. Kasi after the point of harvest, inventory na yan. Pero at the point of harvest, agricultural produce, IS 41. Point of sale cost includes brokers and dealers, commissions, any levies by regulatory authority, and commodity exchange, and any transfer taxes and duties. But it excludes transport and other costs necessary to get the asset to the market kasi nga, it will be part of the yan. Agricultural produce can always be measured reliably. Always be measured. So, you cannot rebut that assumption. Ngayon, fair value measurement. Itong fair value measurement, familiar ka dito. Kasi di ba may hierarchy yan? Di ba may hierarchy yan? Yung first, second, and third. When it comes to fair value measurement. Hindi lang yan sa FAR nakikita, pati na rin sa AFAR. So, sa fair value measurement, yung una is yung active market exists for the asset or produce. Kapag wala yan, punta ka sa second tier. Sa tier 2, access to different active markets that are most relevant and reliable price. Kapag wala rin to, edi pumunta ka na sa pangatlong tier, sa tier 3, sa baba. No active market exists, so the most recent market transaction, market price for similar assets, after adjustment to reflect any difference in the asset and any benchmark, etc. etc. So, yun yung recognition ni biological asset and agricultural produce. Ngayon, yung gains and losses, sa profit or loss yan. Sa government grants, ito basahin na lang natin, an unconditional government grant related to a biological asset. Kasi meron din tayo sa government grant is IS 20 rin yan, di ba? An unconditional government grant related to a biological asset measured at its fair value less cost to sell shall be recognized in profit or loss only when and only when the government grants becomes a receivable. So, kung sure ka na ng receivable yan, measure mo na. If conditional naman, kasi ang conditional, ibig sabihin, walang stipulations, walang provisions sa kailangan mong gawin. Kapag conditional yan, ibig sabihin, may kailangan ka pang may kailangan ka pang tuparin sa usapan nyo, including when a government grant requires an entity not to engage in specified agricultural activity, an entity shall recognize the government grant in profit or loss when and only when the conditions attaching to the government grant are met. Ibig sabihin, natupad mo yung kondisyon na kailangan mong gawin, tsaka mo lang siya i-record, tsaka mo lang siya i-recognize. Now, IS 20, which is the accounting for government grants and disclosures, is applied lang only to a government grant related to a biological asset, measured at its cost, less any accumulated depreciation and any accumulated impairment losses. Kasi makita dito, biological asset, IS 41, yung government grant portion niya, ginagamit lang yan for biological asset measured at its fair value less cost to sell. However, if the biological asset is measured at its cost less any accumulated depreciation and any accumulated impairment loss, then yung IAS 20 ang gagamitin mo. Kapag fair value less cost to sell yung kay biological asset, IAS 41. Pero kapag biological asset measured at its cost less any accumulated depreciation and accumulated impairment loss, IAS 20 yung gamitin mo, kapatid. And IS 41 does not deal with government grants that relate to agricultural produce. Biological asset lang. So yan, for agriculture. Okay, dito naman tayo kay exploration and evaluation of mineral resources. Ngayon, this concept or this accounting is governed by IFRS 6. So, si IFRS 6 addresses the financial reporting for the exploration guys, wait lang. For the exploration for and evaluation of mineral resources, which includes minerals, oil, natural gas, and similar non-regenerative resources. So, dyan na-apply yung IFRS 6. Now, it applies to expenditures incurred in the exploration and evaluation of mineral resources. Meaning, yung mga expenditures incurred na yan, nire-recognize mo yan siya as an asset. An asset that is classified as exploration and evaluation of mineral resources. However, IFRS 6 is not applicable to expenditures that were incurred before an entity has obtained the legal rights to explore a specific area. So, pag hindi pa na-obtain yung legal rights, wala pa siyang karapatan, di wag mo munang i-recognize yan. And after the technical feasibility and commercial viability of extracting a mineral resources are demonstrable. So basically, ito yung process yan Prospecting, naghahanap ka pa lang. Then kapag prospecting na, parang based on your studies, parang meron dito, doon, mag-start ka na ng exploration and evaluation mo. Pag na-confirm mo na, i-develop mo na siya, Pag na-develop po na production na, mag-start ka ng production and later on, after so many years, wala nang natira, or hindi na sa profitable, then closure and rehabilitation na. Ngayon, itong IFRS 6, in this process, only governs these two steps, yung exploration and yung evaluation. Kaya nakalagay dito before an entity obtained and after technical feasibility. Kasi itong before entity obtained, ito na yan. Itong after technical feasibility, kasi sa evaluation man yan determine, so development yan eh. So, ang gino-govern lang ni IFRS 6 is these two, yung exploration and yung evaluation step. Kaya nga, tawag sa kanya exploration and evaluation of mineral resources, di ba? Ngayon, ito yung sasabitin kanina. IFRS 6 does not contain recognition requirements for exploration and evaluations of assets. Oo, hindi siya ganoon ka-stricto. So, ang sabi ni IFRS 6, the entity needs to develop its own accounting policies for recognition of such assets, and most of the time, it is based on kung ano yung industry practice. Kasi nga, gaya sabi natin, pagdating sa mga mineral resources na yan, napaka-complex yan because of the nature itself, di ba? Maghahanap ka, tapos i-estimate mo pa. Mag-assess ka pa kung feasible ba to, profitable ba to. So, because of that complexities, sabi ng standard natin, management decision yan based on the industry practices. Kaya dito, IFRS 6, ganun din. Ngayon, when we account for it, there are two methods. Full cost method and yung successful efforts method. Ngayon, itong full cost method, lahat ng costs that were incurred in acquiring, exploring, and developing within a broadly defined cost center are kinakapitalize mo and ina-amortize mo. Sa method na to, costs are capitalized even if a specific project in the cost center was a failure. So kahit na hindi na-determine nyo na parang nasayang yung effort nyo sa pag-explore, sa pag-evaluate, yun pala hindi feasible yung project. Even though that happens, isasama mo pa rin siya as part of the cost of the, as i-capitalize mo pa rin siya sa asset mo. And amortize na rin later on. Yan sa full cost method. Pero pagdating sa successful efforts method, many costs are capitalized and amortized, and yung cost, kapag unsuccessful yung acquisition and exploration activities mo, china-charge mo sa expense. Hindi mo yan siya kinakapitalize, but rather, china-charge mo sa expense. Yung mga costs whose outcome is unknown are either expense or capitalized. So as you can see here, lahat, pagdating sa full cost method, kaya nga full cost, kinakapitalize mo. Sa successful efforts, yung mga sure na successful lang, or yung may certainty of successful, yung outcome, yun lang yung kinakapitalize mo. And when a problem is silent, ang assumption is successful efforts method yan. Bakit? Kasi successful effort methods provides us with the concept of conservatism. Conservatism. Bakit? Kasi tingnan mo, kahit na failure yan, ikakapitalize mo pa rin. So, magiging part yan ng asset mo. Lulobo yung asset mo. Pero pagdating sa successful efforts, kapag unknown or unsuccessful, na-expense mo, di ba? So, na-expense mo, charge sa expense mo, bawas yan sa income mo. So, nagkakaroon ng true, conservatism. Kasi dito, pwede mong maloko yung tao kahit failure, gagawin mong, ikakapitalize mo as part of the asset. So, lulobo ang asset mo, bababang expenses mo. So, pag lulobo ang asset mo, maganda tingnan sa balance sheet, di ba? And kapag bababang expenses mo, maganda tingnan yung income statement mo. So, medyo dehado. Pero pag successful efforts, yun, true representation. Kaya kapag the problem is silent, successful efforts method tayo. Ito, note sa baba. Ngayon, yung initial measurement niyan, initially at cost yan. And yung mga sinasama dyan, ito, acquisition of rights, topographical, geological, geochemical, and geophysical studies. So, mga expert to, mga professional experts. Exploratory drilling, trenching, sampling, activities in relation to evaluating the technical feasibility and commercial viability of extracting mineral resources, and yung other general administrative and overhead costs that are directly attributable. So, yung mga may labot lang pagdating sa exploration and evaluation. Now, take note, expenditures related to the development of mineral resources, gaya ng preparation for commercial production, yung magtatayo ka ng daan, yung kukonstruct ka ng tunnels, hindi mo siya isasama as part of the or as capitalizable sa exploration and evaluation asset. Hindi siya kasama. Sa iba na yan. Yung mga PPE naman na ginamit mo to develop or maintain yung mga exploration or evaluation assets mo cannot also be recognized as exploration and evaluation asset. Hindi yan sila kasama sa initial measurement. Ngayon, pagdating sa subsequent measurement, an entity classifies an exploration and evaluation asset as either tangible or intangible. Kung tangible yan, part yan ng IAS 16. Intangible, mga IAS 38 na yan, yung mga drilling lights. After initial recognition daw, an entity applies one or two measurement models to exploration and evaluation asset. Cost model and evaluation model. Diba? If you can still remember, IAS 16, dyan yung thorough explanation ng cost model and yung revaluation model natin. Ngayon, nagkakaroon rin ng impairment sa IFRS 16. Because it requires exploration and evaluation assets to be assessed for impairment when facts and circumstances suggest the carrying amount of an exploration and evaluation asset may exceed its recoverable amount. Kasi if you can still remember, IAS 36 talks about impairment, di ba? Sa impairment. And IAS 36 provides that every year, chine-check mo yung mga assets mo for impairment. And if may impairment, record mo. Di ba? If you can still remember, IAS 36 yun, yung impairment natin. So yan lang si IFRS 16. Let's go to investment in associates, yung investment in ASOC natin, and yung joint ventures. Ngayon, IAS 28 governs this standard or this accounting ng investment in associates and joint ventures. Ngayon, IAS 28 is applied by entities that are investors. So, yung investment pa yan eh. Kaya nga investment nakalagay. With either, kapag classified siya as joint control or significant influence lang over an investee. Yeah? Now, si IAS 28 is not applied kapag yung investment is in associates is held by venture or capital organization, kapag mutual fund siya or unit trust, and similar entities kapag yung investment is recognized as fair value at profit or loss or held for trading under IFRS 9. Kasi di ba, if you can still remember, may hierarchy yan or may differences yan. Kapag below, pag investor ka lang, kung saan profit or loss or held for trading, IFRS 9, di ba? Then kapag meron ka ng significant influence, yun na, investment ng associates. Ngayon, kapag meron ka ng control, yung next dyan, yung next sa taas, tawag na doon is yung, tawag dito? Business combination, parent, subsidiary relationship na yan, di ba? Consolidated financial statements na yan. If I can still remember, PFRS 6 ata yun and PFRS 10, yung business combination and consolidation of financial statements. So, may hierarchy yan. And yung another one is yung joint ventures. So, apat yan sila. Yung fair value, profit or loss, or held for trading, IFRS 9 yan, sa mababa. Sa taas niya is yung significant influence, which is the investment associates. Yung higher kay significant influence is yung control na, which is the business combination and consolidated financial statements. Yeah? And yung another one is yung joint ventures. So, yung objective ng IAS 28 natin is to prescribe the accounting for investment in associates and to set out the requirements daw of the application of the equity method when accounting for investments in associates and joint ventures. Okay. So, ito yung mga notes lang to take notice or to take notes to remember. Yung associate, an entity which the investor has significant influence. So, may investor tayo, may investment siya kay associate. Yeah, ganyan yan. Ngayon, consolidated financial statements, the financial statements of the parent and its subsidiaries are presented as those of a single economic entity. So, yan yung sa business combination natin. Yeah? Parent-subsidiary relationship kung saan si parent, control siya meron. Hindi lang significant influence but rather control ang meron siya. Ngayon, yung equity method. Ito yung method ng accounting natin whereby the investment, kasi meron tayong fair value method, meron tayong cost method, meron tayong revalue, meron rin tayong equity method on the other hand. Ito yung method ng accounting whereby the investment initially recognized as cost. And yung subsequent measurement niya are adjusted thereafter for the post-acquisition change in the investor share of the investee's net assets, meaning yung equity niya. Ano meaning yan? Kapag may nagkaroon ng changes sa equity ni tawag dito, ni associate or ng investee, yung changes sa equity niyan, madadamay or it will reflect the changes sa investment mo. Ibig sabihin ko, may changes sa equity kasi or sa net assets, kasi other naman ng net asset is equity, ni investee, magkakaroon rin ng changes sa investment mo under the equity method. Like for example, ito, investors' profit or loss includes its share of investee's profit or loss, and investors' other comprehensive income includes its share of the investee other comprehensive income. Like for example, di ba? May video naman tayo dyan sa CFAS natin, doon sa CFAS ko sa mga first year. Di ba? Yung pag nagkakaroon ng income si nagkakaroon ng income si investee. Let's say equity method to. Nagkakaroon ng income si investee. Di ba? Pag nagkakaroon siya ng income summary yan. Saan kinuklose ang income summary? Sa retained earnings. Saan located ang retained earnings? Sa equity. So, ibig sabihin, kapag nagkakaroon ng income si investee, record, tapos equity method yan, then magkakaroon ng changes sa investment ni investor. Kasi nga, sabi dito, changes that affects the investee's net assets will affect the investor's investment in the investee. Ito, joint arrangement, an arrangement in which two or more parties have joint control. And kung saan yung joint control is defined as the contractually agreed sharing of control of an arrangement which exists only when decisions about the relevant activities require the unanimous consent of the parties sharing control. Ngayon itong joint control, joint venture, nadi-discussion siya sa AFR. O sa AFR to siya if I remember correctly. Ngayon, paano natin malalaman kung, wait muna, basahin mo ito yung joint venture. Basahin natin yung joint venture. Itong joint venture naman, arrangement din siya. Whereby the parties have joint control of the arrangement and yung rights nila is sa net assets ng arrangement. Ngayon, ang difference nila, ni joint control and joint venture, etong sa kanila, yung karapatan nila is over the assets and liabilities. Ito yung mga technique na tutunayan sa boards. Joint control, assets, and liabilities yung karapatan ng mga investors. However, pagdating sa joint ventures, yung karapatan ng parties is sa net assets. Joint control yung karapatan sa assets and liabilities ng mga parties. On the other hand, yung sa joint ventures, yung karapatan ng mga parties sa net asset. So, joint venturers, a party to a joint venture that has joint control of or joint venture. Significant influence, tama. Ito naman yung the power to participate in the financial and operating policy decisions of the investee, but walang control or joint control over those policies. Kasi may hierarchy tayo, di ba? Control, joint, tawag dito, significant influence. Ito naman, joint control. And yung simpleng investor ka lang, which is under IFRS 9. Ngayon, ito yung concept ng significant influence. Sa significant influence, it is presumed that the investor holds directly or indirectly 20% or more of the voting power. Now, take note, voting power. Voting power. Voting power. Voting power. Meaning, mga ordinary shares lang yan or mga shares na basically may voting power. Kapag walang voting power yung shares na yan, then ang meaning yan, edi wala siyang significant influence. Kahit sabihin natin na 50% or kahit sabihin natin 100% ng preference share, pag may-ari mo, you cannot say na may significant influence ka kasi walang voting power ang preference share. Yeah? So, take note, voting powers are usually ordinary shares yan. However, there are instances where hindi na-reach yung 20% threshold. Let's say, mga 18, 15, yeah? However, kapag nangyari yon, hindi mo pwede sabihin agad na walang significant influence. Tingnan mo muna yung nature ng ownership or ng relationship. Kasi, kahit na hindi yan na-reach yung 20%, pag may representation sa or material transactions occurring between the entities, ito, pag participation sa policy making, the changing of management, and the provision of essential technical information, na-check to sila. Yeah? Nakita mo na kahit hindi na-reach yung 20% pero may changing over na management. Nakita mo kahit na hindi na-reach yung 20% pero may material transactions between the investor and the investee. So, in that case, masasabi mo pa rin na may significant influence. So, tandaan nyo, Kahit na hindi na-reach yung 20% threshold, pero nakita nyo na may, pag nakita nyo to sila, then you can still say na may significant influence. Take note, potential voting rights are to be considered when currently exercisable. Ito yung mga, if you can still remember sa, tawag dito, sa equity discussion under intermediate accounting party. Yung mga share rights, di ba? Yung mga share rights, yung mga share na pwede mong i-claim. So, i-consider mo rin yun. Loss of significant influence when the investor loses the power to participate in the financial and operating policy decisions of the investee. So, wala na yung significant influence mo. Now, this can occur without the loss of voting power or without change in the ownership levels. Depende sa circumstances. Pero pag nawala na yung power to participate mo sa financial and operating policy decision investee, loss of significant influence din. Ngayon, ito naman yung itsura ng equity method. Yeah? Under the equity method, the investment, gaya na sabi natin kanina, in the associate is recognized initially at cost. Yan yung initial measurement. Yung subsequent measurement naman, and then the carrying amount is adjusted to recognize the investor share of profit or loss of the investee after the date. The investor share of the profit or loss of the associate is recognized in the statement of comprehensive income and adjustment to the carrying amount. May discussion naman tayo dito sa CFAS namin, ng mga first year, in the TDF accounts discussion ng equity method. Adjustment to the carrying amount may be necessary or distribution, received or to changes in the investor's interest in the investee or changes arising from the revaluation of property, plant, and equipment. And for example, ito, kung makikita nyo dito, sa equity method, itong mga share na to, diba? Increase in investment account, ibig sabihin na either share in profit of the associate or additional investment ka, di ba? Or ito na may mga decrease in investment account, yung share in losses of the associate and cash dividends received. As you can see, itong mga nangyari to, itong mga events na to affects the equity of the investee. It affects his or her or the investee's net assets. So yung mga effects na yan, nagkaroon ng effect sa net asset investee, magkakaroon ng effect sa investment ni investor under the equity method. So ganun lang yung kasimple. So yan yung sa IAS 28. Okay, now let's go to investment property, which is, I think, ito, IAS 40. So, IAS 40 governs the accounting for investment property and it shall be applied in the recognition, measurement, and yung disclosure ng investment property. Ngayon, ano ba ang definition ng investment property? Sabi ni IAS 40, kinakagat ng mga kuting yung paa ko. Okay. These are properties, land or building man siya or part of a building or both that are held by the owner or by the lessee under finance lease to earn rentals or for capital appreciation or baka both. So yan yung investment property. Property siya na hinuhold, kung saan yung purpose yan is to earn rentals or for capital appreciation, meaning para tumaas yung value niya. So in that case, that is considered to be investment property. Ngayon, hindi mo siya mako-consider as investment property when the property itself is used in the production or supply of goods and services or for administrative purposes kasi that is under IAS 16 yan eh. And hindi mo rin mako-consider na investment property yung property if it is part of if it is sold in the ordinary course of business kasi that is considered to be IAS 2 inventory. So yan investment property. It is held para anong purpose? To earn rentals or for capital appreciation or both. Yan si investment property. Hindi siya ginagamit sa operations, hindi siya ginagamit as pangbenta. Kasi pag ginagamit siya sa operations, that is considered to be IAS 16, PPE. Pag ginagamit siya or it is sold as inventory, it is sold in the ordinary course of business, kaya naman real properties, estate, di ba? Real property developers, that is considered to be IAS 2 inventories. Ngayon, investment property generates cash flows that are largely independent from other assets held by the entity. So, hindi niya kailangan ng ibang assets ng entity to generate cash flow. Kasi on its own, it can generate by itself. Either yung rentals or yung pagdating pa ako. Tayo nyo. May kuting. Tatlo sila sa baba. Meow. 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 Kinakagat pa ako. Uy. Ayusin ko muna. Okay. So yan yan yung investment property. It generate cash flow that are largely independent from the assets held by the entity. So take note, when it is an owner-occupied property, ibig sabihin yung owner itself yung nag-occupy niyan. Kasi di ba pag rentals, hindi yung owner yung nag-occupy but rather yung tenant. And kapag capital appreciation, ibig sabihin, wala dyan yung hindi yan occupied ng owner kasi hinahayaan nilang mag-appreciate, tumaas yung value niyan. Kapag naging owner-occupied property na yan, di gagamitin na yan sa operations ng business. Kapag ginamit na yan sa operations ng business, ano na yan? Ito na yan siya, IAS 16 na yan. Kaya ang sabi dito, owner-occupied property is held for use in the production or supply of goods, services, or for administrative purposes. IAS 16 yan. Ngayon, ito yung mga examples or mga instances na kung saan masabi mong investment property siya and masabi mong hindi siya investment property. Ito, investment property, land held for long-term capital appreciation rather than for short-term sale. Di ba? Or pag hindi siya investment property, kapag intended for sale siya, under the ordinary course of business, IAS 2 yan. Ito, land held for currently undetermined future use, investment property yan. Building owned by the entity and leased out under leases, pero IFRS 16 natin, wala nang wala nang, basically, para naging negligent na yung operating lease, mostly finance lease na yun. Kasi, di ba, napalitan na yung IAS 17, which is finance lease, or the leases ng IFRS 16. Well, may discussion naman yan, na-discuss yan sa mga third year sa kanilang accounting for business, accounting for special transactions under accounting for franchisor in a lease. Yeah? Accounting for franchisors. Ito na, discuss ko kung ano yung nangyari sa bagong IFRS 16. So, building that is vacant but is held to be leased under one or more operating lease and property that is being constructed or developed for future use as investment property, property that is leased to another entity under finance lease, yan, not investment property yan. Pero tandaan nyo, ang leases, bago na yan siya, IFRS 16 na yan siya. Ngayon, notes. How is property classified when an entity occupies part of that property and leases out the balance? Meaning, yung part na yan, ino-occupy niya, yung another part niyan is, makulit talaga makuting, no? And yung other part niyan is nililis niya. Paano? If the two portions can be sold separately, then you will account each of them appropriately. Kapag hindi naman mabenta separately, ibig sabihin dapat as one sila, then the entire property is treated as investment property only if an insignificant portion, which is around 2%, is owner-occupied. So, yan yung rule dyan. So, paano i-classify yung property that is when the owner provides ancillary services? Ano tong ancillary services? Like for example, sa mga hotel, di ba? They provide maintenance, utilities, di ba? Ancillary services yun. Now, ano ang classification mo sa property na kung saan si owner nagpo-provide ng ancillary services like maintenance and utilities? If such service are insignificant as a whole, investment property yan. Oo, insignificant dapat. Ngayon, how is property classified when an entity owns property that is leased to and occupied by its parent or another subsidiary? Ito, related parties to. Ibig sabihin, tawag dito, parent mo yung pinapa-occupy mo or co-subsidiary mo under a one parent yung pinapa-occupy mo ng property. So, in that case, paano yung reporting mo? At a group or consolidation level, the property is considered to be owner-occupied. Bakit? Di ba? Kasi, when it comes to consolidated financial statements, you treat it as single entity yung reporting. Kaya in that case, it is considered to be owner-occupied. However, at individual company level, sa kanilang separate FS, the owning entity treats the building as investment property. Kasi separate level na eh. May kanya-kanya na sila. Pero pagdating sa consolidated financial statements, the entities they're all treated as a single entity. So, owner-occupied yan. Pero pag individual level, separate FS yan, investment property. Ngayon, paano recognition ng investment property? According to IAS 1, probable economic benefit, cost measured reliably, di ba? For ano yan, di ba? Yan yung rule nung napag-usapan natin last time pa. Sa initial measurement niyan, at cost, including the transaction cost. The purchase price, directly attributable expenditures, ito sila. Yung mga costs na not included, startup costs, operating losses, and abnormal amounts of wasted material, labor, other resources na construction. Ngayon, when it comes to the subsequent measurement, kasi sa initial measurement, cost ang ginagamit natin. Sa subsequent measurement, either magko-cost model ka or fair value model. Ito yung sa fair value model. Yeah, basahin na natin. And ito yung sa cost model. Ngayon, paano pag nagkaroon ng transfer and disposal? Ibig sabihin, hindi na siya matatrato as investment property. Diba? Transfer to and from investment property shall be made when and only when there is a change of use evidenced by. Ito kapag nagkaroon ng commencement of owner occupation, meaning from investment property, naging owner occupied siya. From investment property, IAS 41, magiging IAS 16 na siya, PPE. Agree. Pangalawa, kapag nagkaroon ng commencement of development with a view to sale, ibig sabihin, ibebenta na, gagawin na siyang inventory, di ba? So, magiging from investment property, magiging IAS 2 na siya, inventories. Kapag nagkaroon ng end of owner occupation, meaning from transfer to investment property siya, yeah? From PPE, naging investment property, from IAS 6, naging IAS 41. Commencement of an operating lease to another party, transfer from inventories or property plant equipment to investment property. So, paano pag nagkaroon ng disposal? So, investment property shall be recognized on disposal or at the time that no benefit is expected from future use or disposal and any gain or loss determination as the difference between the net disposal proceeds and a carrying amount and is recognized in profit or loss. Now, itong sa investment property, madali lang ito sa board exam. Wala siyang kahirap-hirap. Ito, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. Ito, paglabas sa board exam, mostly theories to siya. Paano ang theories? Ito. Now, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets is governed by IAS 37. And it shall be applied by all entities in accounting for provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. However, it cannot be applied or hindi siya pwede proper application na kung saan it resulted from executory contract. So take note, executory contract is different from an executed one. Kasi ang executory contract meaning wala pang performance na nangyari from the parties or if ever man nagkaroon ng performance, hindi siya significant. Magiging executed, siya? Executed contract kapag may performance na, significant performance. Pero this executory, kaya nga executed, di ba? Executory, wala pa. Except for the contract is onerous. Now, take note, onerous contract basically means na both parties may obligation. Both parties may obligation kasi may tinatawag din tayong gratuitous, di ba? Yung sa mga donation, gratuitous, kung saan free willing na binigay for the benefit of another. Pero pag executory contract, wala yan. Pero kapag yung executory contract is onerous, then isama mo. And those covered by another standard. Diyan sila sinasama. So, anong objective ni IAS 37? Basically, IAS 37 provides that ang gusto niyang mangyari to ensure that appropriate recognition criteria and measurement bases are applied sa provisions, sa contingent liabilities, and sa contingent assets. And second, in order to mandate sufficient information na dapat ma-disclose in the notes to enable users to understand their nature and timing and amount. Kasi yung mga provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, medyo murky yung kanilang existence because of the probability in them. Paano? Kasi kailangan ng appropriate recognition kasi medyo siya Pagdating sa mga IAS 37, pagdating sa mga provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, medyo alanganin yan siya. Medyo murky yan siya. Hindi siya yung virtually certain. Doon na. Ito, definition of terms. Provision, a liability of uncertain, di ba? Hindi siya virtually certain. So, may mga uncertainties yan siya. Kaya kailangan make sure na properly disclosed, properly accounted for. Kasi provisions, it is a liability with uncertain timing or uncertain amount. So, tandaan nyo, either lang sa dalawa. Kasi pag naging present siyang dalawa, then it is considered to be contingent liability. So, dapat isa lang. Liability definition, a present obligation of the entity, alam na natin to, arises from past events, settlements sa future, with an outflow of economic benefits. Di ba? Obligating event, an event that creates a legal or constructive obligation na kung saan it results to an entity having no realistic alternative but to settle the obligation. Kaya nga, obligating event eh. Legal obligation, an obligation that is derived from contract, legislation, or other operation of law. Ito, definition ng constructive obligation kung saan ito is an obligation that derives from an entity's action kung saan based on their actions, ito yung nangyayari. Where by an established pattern or past practice, published policies of or a sufficiently specific current statement, the entity has indicated to other parties that it will accept certain responsibilities kapag kilala ka na sa ganyang gawain. Basically, ganun. Kapag kilala ka sa ganyang gawain, alam nila na ganyang ginagawa mo, may expectation na on your part na ganun yung gagawin mo based on your past practices. And as a result, the entity has created a valid expectation, gaya na sabi natin, on the part of those other parties that it will discharge those responsibilities. So, may expectation on your part. Ngayon, ito naman yung definition ng contingent liabilities under the definition of terms. A possible obligation that arises from passive events. Tandaan nyo, possible obligation. Possible obligation, yan yung keyword pagdating sa contingent liability. Possible obligation that arises from passive events and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the entity. Basta yun yung kay contingent liability, possible obligation. Possibility lang. It is a present obligation that arises from past events pero hindi siya nire-recognize. Bakit hindi siya nire-recognize? Kasi ito, walang probability or it is not probable that an outflow of resources embodying economic benefits will be required to settle the obligation or the amount of the obligation cannot be measured with sufficient reliability. Yan yung reason bakit si contingent liability hindi nire-recognize but rather, as we will know later, dinidisclose lang because possible lang siya. Ito naman kay contingent asset, possible asset lang siya. Hindi siya probable, hindi siya virtually certain, but rather possible asset lang siya that arises from past events and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the entity. So as you can see, based on this, contingent assets, contingent liability, and provision, meron uncertainty in their nature, may uncertainty. Hence, mayroon tayong IAS 37 in order to account for that uncertainty in order to account for that uncertainty. Kaya mayroong IAS 37 para ma-properly accounted for. So, onerous contracts, a contract in which the unavoidable cost of meeting the obligation under the contract exceed the economic benefits expected to be received from it. And restructuring program, ito yung program na pinaplano or a program that is planned and controlled by management and materially changes either the scope of business undertaking by an entity and the manner in which that business is conducted. Diba? Pag nagbabasa kayo ng mga news, may nakita kayong restructuring program ng mga entity. Usually, ginagawa yan ng mga entity na kung saan hindi maganda yung performance nila or bankrupt na sila. Di ba? Nag-declare na silang bankruptcy. So, magkakaroon sila ng restructuring program. Ito na yun. Ngayon, ito yung nag-aaway yung mga pusa. Wait lang. Huwag na mag-aaway. Go. So, ito classes of liabilities. Ito, aware naman tayo dito. Trade payables, sa pag-usapan natin ito last time, these are liabilities to pay for goods and services that have been received or supplied and have been invoiced or formally agreed with the supplier. Diba? Trade payables yan. Yung isa, non-trade payables, kasi yung non-trade payables, it arises from the financing activities. Trade payables arises from the operations. Accruals, ito yung mga liabilities to pay for goods and services that have been received or supplied pero hindi pa binayaran. Invoice or formally agreed with the supplier. Provisions, ito yung pinag-uusapan natin. Ito yung may uncertainty. Liabilities with uncertain timing or amount. Pero kinoconsider pa rin sa present obligation na may probable outflow of economic benefit. Yan si provisions. On the other hand, si contingent liabilities, ito yung mga hindi nire-recognize. Hindi siya nire-recognize, pero dinidisclose lang siya. Bakit hindi siya nire-recognize? Gaya nasabi din kanina, kasi nga, possible obligation lang siya. Hindi siya probable. And present obligations that do not meet the recognition criteria in the standard. Ito yung reason, no? As we have said. Ito. Paano tinirecognize yung provisions? yung contingent liabilities and yung contingent assets. Provisions shall be recognized when all are present. And ito, di ba? As you can see, similar to sa similar or identical to sa recognition of liabilities na napag-usapan natin sa payables, di ba? And sa previous video, an entity has a present obligation, whether it's legal or constructive, as a result of past event. May probability, or there's a probable. It is probable that an outflow of resources embodying economic activities will be required to settle the obligation. Yan yung pangalawang requirement or requisite. And yung pangatlo, kasi nga nakalagay end. Take note pag end yan nakalagay dyan, ibig sabihin lahat dapat yan. Kapag or, ibig sabihin either lang. And lastly, a reliable estimate can be made of the amount of the obligation. So kung check to lahat, then may provision ka. Present obligation, probable that an outflow, and reliable estimation. Ngayon, on the other hand, contingent liabilities, hindi siya nire-recognize, pero dinidisclose lang siya. Hindi siya sinasama sa sa amount, sa values mo sa excess, pero nasa disclosure siya. Pero, kapag yung outflow of economic benefit is remote, do nothing. Wala kang gagawin. Kasi ang contingent liabilities, possible yan siya. Kasi may hierarchy yan virtually certain, probable, possible, remote. Si provisions nasa probable siya. Si contingent liability nasa possible siya. Kung nag-remote yan, wala kang gagawin. Contingent assets, hindi mo siya din-disclose. Wala yan siya. Din-disclose, hindi siya nire-recognize. However, kapag yung probability ng inflow of economic benefit is there, probable. Kasi si contingent assets, same nature yan kay contingent liability. Possible lang. Contingent asset, possible lang din. Pero kapag yung ito, nagkaroon ng probable na, hindi na possible, disclose yan. Sir, may mas madaling paraan ba, sir, para mag-gets yan? Ito, meron tayong table. As you can see, ito yung sa assets, and ito yung liabilities. Flow of resources. Virtually certain na magkakaroon ng flow of resources. Pag assets to the entity, kapag liabilities palabas ng entity, di ba? Yung flow of resources. Ngayon, tandaan nyo, iba yung assets sa liabilities, obviously. Yan yung sa assets. Normal asset, kapag yung probability, kapag yung possibility, di ba? Napupunta tayo sa statistics ba, Kapag yung possibility is virtually certain, di ba? Which is 81% or 99 to 99%, normal asset yan siya. Recognize and disclose sa books. Kapag yung flow of resources is only probable, meaning 51 to 80%, consider yan siya as contingent asset. And contingent asset, as we have said, is only disclosed in the notes. On the other hand, kapag yung flow of resources only possible, meaning 10 to 50% lang yan, ignore, no recognition disclosure. Sa remote, pag naging remote yan, obviously, ignore rin, no recognition disclosure. Ganyan sa asset. And makikita nyo, mas stricto yung asset as compared sa liabilities. Kita nyo liabilities, ito, virtually certain yung flow of resources outside or outflow sa entity, outflow. Normal liability, recognize and disclose. On the other hand, kapag probable lang yan, 51 to 80%, provision ang tawag yan. Yan yung sasabi ting probable outflow. So, recognize and disclose pa rin siya. Kapag possible yan siya, contingent liability yan, disclose only in the notes. Disclose only in the notes. Kapag naging remote na, no recognition disclosure. As you can see, ito na. Makikita nyo, okay, dito virtually certain, normal. Pagdating ng probability, pagdating ng probable, kita nyo, contingent asset siya. Wala tayong ka-same or kapareho ng provisions when it comes to assets. Bakit? Bakit ganyan yan, sir? Kasi bakit contingent asset agad? Yung contingent liability sa possible pa. Ang contingent asset, kapag probable, disclose lang. Kapag possible, ignore, di ba? Bakit ganyan, sir? Because of conservatism. Di ba? Tatandaan nyo, Ilang beses ko na inulit yung concept conservatism. When it comes to asset, stricto tayo. Sobra tayong stricto. Iniiwasan natin yung overvaluation. When it comes to liability, stricto tayo. Iniiwasan natin yung undervaluation. Meaning, kailangan mong i-disclose lahat ng liabilities mo. Wala kang itatago. Kasi diba, as we know, pag tinitingnan natin yung FS, medyo pangit tingnan pag mataas yung liability. So, ang problema dyan, undervaluation, di ba? Kaya pagdating sa conservatism principle, stricto tayo dito. Oo, lalo na kay stricto tayo sa recognition of napaka-stricto natin sa recognition of assets. Hindi basta-basta nire-recognize o hindi tayo basta-basta nagre-recognize ng asset. Kaya makikita nyo dito, yung nire-recognize lang natin is yung mga virtually certain assets. Yung mga probable, dinidisclose na lang natin. Yung possible remote, ignore. Pero makita nyo, sa liabilities, gusto natin ipakita, gusto natin i-present, o ayaw natin magtago ng liabilities for proper presentation. Kaya makita nyo dito, kahit ang probable lang yan, nire-recognize pa rin natin yan as provisions. Kapag possible na lang, nagdi-disclose pa rin tayo. Kapag remote lang, tsaka lang tayo nag-i-ignore. So, yun yung reason. Ngayon, pa natin in-estimate ang provisions. The amount recognized sa provision shall be the best estimate. Yan yung gagamitin mo. Paano ma-determine yan? Judgment of the management of the entity. Uncertainties on the best estimate, ito yan. Kapag it involves large population, expected value method. Matatandaan nyo sa management subject yung paano ito kinumpute, di ba? Continuous range of possible outcomes, yung midpoint of the range. Kapag single obligation is measured, lalo na sa mga litigations, di ba, sa korte, yung most likely outcome. And it should be measured before tax. So kung after tax yan, work back mo. Kapag time value of money is material, present value mo. Future events shall be reflected in the amount of provision where there is sufficient objective evidence that will occur. Ngayon, when there's an expected disposal of assets, gains from the expected disposal of the asset shall not be taken into account in measuring a provisions. Ngayon, paano pag nagkaroon ng reimbursements? Meaning, yes, may babayaran kang obligation, pero in the future, alam mong mababawi mo yon through a reimbursement. For example, sa insurance, di ba? Alam mo mababawi mo. Kahit na may obligation ka babayaran, alam mo mababawi mo. Reimbursement yun. Now, paano may ni-account? When reimbursement shall be recognized only when it is virtually certain na may reimbursement ka talagang marireceive at the first place. And second, the reimbursement shall be treated as a separate asset. Meaning it shall not exceed the amount of the provision. So hindi mo siya i-write off or isi-set off. It will be recognized as a separate asset. So parang receivable, di ba? Changes in and use of provisions. Now, provisions shall be reviewed at the end of each reporting period and adjusted to reflect the current best estimate. Ito naman yung accounting for provisions, 'di ba? Alam niyo na yung warranties, 'di ba? Warranties, ito yun sila, yung formula niya. Ito naman yung sa premiums. And ito yung sa mga lawsuits, mga litigations, most likely amount. So yan yung discussion natin for this PowerPoint. Kinumbine natin lahat. And okay, now let's go to intangible assets. So, intangible assets is governed by PS 38 or IS 38. Ngayon, ano nga ba tong intangible asset? So, separate muna natin sila. Ano nga bang intangible? Ano yung asset? Ang intangible is something that is unable to be touched or grasped. Parang crush mo. Hindi mo matahawakan, hindi magiging sayo. And it has no physical presence. Parang crush mo rin. Yung asset naman, as we have said sa definition natin last time pa, it is a resource controlled by the entity na kung saan yung resource na yan, future economic benefit will flow to the entity and it is resulted from a passive event. Yan yung asset. So, i-combine mo yung dalawa, intangible asset, isa itong asset na walang physical presence na abstract. Ito ang definition ng intangible asset according to the standard itself. It is an intangible assets are identifiable, non-monetary asset without any physical substance. So, separate natin ulit yung tatlong tatlong components ng definition ng intangible assets. Identifiable, non-monetary, and without physical substance. So, identifiable meaning it is separable or arises from contractual or other legal rights. Ibig sabihin, may separate entity siya. May separate identity siya. Sa non-monetary asset, it is wala tong predetermined fixed amount, its value changes over time, and it is tougher to liquidate. Pagdating sa without physical substance, parang yun natin ang synonym niya, it is abstract. Wala siyang physical presence. So yan, pag-combine mo yan, yan yung nature ng isang intangible asset according to PAS 38. Ngayon, anong objective ng PAS 38? Sabi nito, prescribes the accounting treatment for intangible assets that are not dealt with specifically by under standards gaya ng IAS 32 and IFRS 6. Ngayon, paano nire-recognize ang isang intangible asset? Well, as we have said nung PAS 1, since asset siya or since accounting element siya, in order to recognize that, una, it is probable that expected future economic benefits that are attributable to the asset will flow to the entity. And second, yung cost niya can be measured reliably. Ito na yung mga examples ng intangible assets. So, patents, franchise, patents, copyrights, franchise, trademarks, brand names, franchises, sales, design, computer software, website cost, service size, goodwill, brands, masses, setting, and customers list. Yan yung mga example. However, may caveat tayo. Ito lang yung mga nire-recognize under PAS 38. Ito sila, cannot be recognized. Ito mga internally generated goodwill, brands, mastheads, and publishing titles, customers list. But take note, hindi lang sila nire-recognize kapag internally generated. Kapag pinurchase mo yan, recognize mo yan. Pero kapag internally generated yan, hindi yan nire-recognize. Pero kapag pinurchase mo, recognize yan. Ngayon, pati min-measure ang intangible asset. It is measured initially at cost. Oo, it is measured initially at cost. Ngayon, take note. Anong take note? Merong mga ways on how to acquire intangible asset. Yung una, separate acquisition. Kung saan, fundamentally similar yung pag-account nito o pag-measure nito ng initial measurement sa PPE. Oh, similar sila. Ito, kaya nga, nakalagay ito, purchase price, including importing duties and non-refundable taxes, di ba? Deducting trade discounts and rebates. So, same na same. Any directable attributable cost, sama mo rin. Ito sila. Ito naman, the following are not part of the cost intangible asset. Ganyan sabi natin. Similar sa PPE, sa initial measurement, di ba? Cost of introducing new product or services, di yan kasama. Cost of conducting new business or conducting business in new location. Administration and other general overhead costs. Cost incurred while an asset is capable of operating in a manner intended by management or has yet to be brought into use and initial operating costs, di ba? Hindi sila kasama. Kita nyo similarities nila, di ba? Sa ng PPE. On the other hand, kapag yung intangible asset was acquired as part of a business combination, di ba? If you consider, remember, business combination, IFRS 3, kapag may intangible asset yung si acquiree, sinasama yan siya sa pag-account ng business combination. So, sabi ni IFRS 3, if an intangible asset is acquired in a business combination, yung cost ng intangible asset na yan, fair value at the acquisition date. Di ba? Yan yung ginagamit natin recognition when it comes to IFRS 3 business combination. Ngayon, take note, may mga gaya ng sabi dito, may mga intangible asset si acquiree na hindi niya nire-recognize. However, at business combination, si acquirer i-recognize niya yun. Oo. Yun yung sabi. Kasi, yun yung sabi ni IFRS 3. If you can still remember. Another way of acquiring intangible asset, kung saan magano ka ng initial measurement is galing sa acquisition by way of government grant. This may happen when the government transfer or allocates costs or allocates to an entity intangible assets gaya ng airport landing rights, licenses to operate radio or television stations, RPA-BCBN, import licenses or quotas or rights to access other restricted resources. Sabi dito, initially measured at fair value. Entity doesn't recognize its fair value, the entity. So, basta simple lang itong intangible assets. Wala itong problema pagdating sa board exam. Kasi pagdating sa board exam, ang problem ng ang intangible asset to, tiris to siya. Another way of acquiring an intangible asset is to exchange of asset. Diba? Similarities talaga sila sa PPE. Ito yung sasabi. when there's commercial substance, may hierarchy tayo ng pag-measure ng na-acquire mong intangible asset. Fair value of the asset given up, pag wala yan, fair value of the asset received. Pag wala rin yan, carrying amount of the asset given up. On the other hand, kapag walang commercial substance, then yung cost ng intangible asset mo will be carrying amount, yung gagamitin mong valuation is yung carrying amount of the asset given up. Ito pag may commercial substance, ito pag wala. And lastly, when that intangible asset is internally generated, gaya ng mga patents, di ba? Gaya ng mga patents, internally generated yan, copyrights. Possible yan sila for internal generation. Now, in that case, meron tayong process para dyan. To assess whether internally generated intangible assets meets the criteria for recognition, ang gagawin ni entity will classify the generation of the asset into two, research phase and yung development phase. Excuse me po. Research phase and development phase. Ika-classify niya yan. Sa research phase, expense immediately when incurred. Kasi nagre-research ka pa lang eh. Wala ka pang nararating. Yeah? If the problem is silent, assume na ang sinasabi dyan is research phase. Yung sinasabing process, assume na research phase when the problem is silent. Ito to, mga examples. Activities aim at obtaining new knowledge. The search for, evaluation, and selection of application, research finding of or other knowledge. The search for alternatives for materials, devices, products, processes, systems, or services, and the formulation, design, evaluation, and final selection of possible alternatives for new or improved materials, devices, products, processes, systems, and dami binabasa. So yan yan research phase. On the other hand, may tinatawag tayong development phase. Sa development phase, an intangible asset arising from development phase shall be recognized if and only if an entity can demonstrate all of the following. Dapat our meaning yan, lahat ito present in order to recognize an intangible asset in the development phase. Kasi diba, pag research phase, expense immediately. Pero pag development phase na, dapat lahat to sila present in order to recognize the intangible asset. Una, technical feasibility, intention to complete, ability to use or sell, generate probable future economic benefits, availability of adequate technical, financial, and other resources, and ability to measure reliably the expenditure. So yan, dapat present yan sila, 6 sila. Note if the problem is silent on whether certain expenditure or process in the development phase meets all the criteria above, the said expenditure shall be assumed to not have met the criteria for capitalization. So basically, kapag malabo yung expenditure under development phase, kasi na hindi sinasabi na it meets all the criteria, assume na hindi siya kasama ng criteria for capitalization, so expense yan. Ngayon, napag-usapan natin ang initial measurement, let's go to subsequent measurement. Similar din sa PPE, gaya na sabi natin, similar talaga sa PPE. Cost model and revaluation model. Ngayon, ang intangible assets, para rin siyang PPE, same concept sa depreciating ng PPE, pero ang tawag lang natin is amortization. Ina-amortize natin ang intangible asset. So, similar lang yung concept nila. Ngayon, the entity shall assess whether the useful life of an intangible asset is finite or indefinite. Or finite or indefinite or indefinite. Mas maganda pronounce finite. So, finite or indefinite. Kapag indefinite, meaning no foreseeable limit to the period over which the asset is expected to generate cash flow sa entity. Sa finite, ibig sabihin, parang kaya na shota mo, hindi pang habang buhay, the useful life of an intangible asset that arises from a contractual legal right shall not exceed the period of the contractual right or legal rights. Binabasa na lang natin. No? Kasi ganyan makasimple si intangible assets. Understandable agad yung concept niya. Ito naman, basahin si renewable legal right. Ito, amortization. Basic lang yung sa amortization. Same lang sa idea ni depreciation. Ngayon, ang intangible assets as provided by IAS 36 or PAS 36 impairment, ini-impair din natin siya. Ini-impair din natin si intangible assets kapag upon assessment at the end of the reporting period, nagkaroon ng impairment, edi impair mo siya. Yun ang sabi ni IAS 36. Ngayon, as we have said, sabi ni IAS 36, there is impairment when the carrying amount is greater than the or exceeds the recoverable amount of the asset. And recoverable amount, as we have said, is the higher between the fair value less cost to sell and the assets value in use. So, ito, recoverable amount. Familiar naman tayo sa concept na to. Retirement and disposal, ngayon, dinirecognize natin as with other assets, dinirecognize natin ang intangible asset kapag dinispose mo na siya or wala ng future economic benefits that is expected from the use of the, So, the recognition, di ba? Madali lang ito So, yan yung, basically, ito yung ginamit kong PPT nung nag-demo ako for the job application as a teacher sa WIMSO. So, yan lang yung natin. Intangible asset. Madali lang ito siya. If lalabas sa board exam, tiris to ang question sa kanya. So, with that, let's end. Bye-bye. Love you.